The ivory lace of my Vera Wang gown was turning a heavy, wet crimson. Through the stinging blur of my own blood, I watched my fiancé, Raymond Montgomery, lift his childhood sweetheart, Clara, into his arms. "I'm sorry, Beatrice," he whispered, not even looking back. "She needs me more." Then he left me to die. The scent of white lilies always makes me want to gag now. On October the 14th, 2024, the Grand Ballroom at the St. Regis, New York, was supposed to be the backdrop of my fairy tale. I had spent 18 months planning every detail. The 5-tier vanilla bean cake, the custom hand-painted menus, the heavy silk veil that dragged tic-tics to told behind and to me. I was 26, hopelessly in love, and utterly blind. Raymond Montgomery was the golden boy of Manhattan real estate. Charming, attentive, and always just a little bit out of reach. I thought his emotional distance was just the stoicism of a man running a billion-dollar empire alongside his formidable father, Arthur Montgomery. I didn't realize it was because his heart had been locked away years ago, given entirely to Clara Hensley, the fragile, doe-eyed girl next door who had moved to London 3 years prior. Then Clara came back. She arrived at our wedding uninvited, wearing a washed-out lavender dress that made her look like a ghost. I remember the exact sequence of sounds, the sudden hush of the 300 guests, the sharp click of Clara's cheap heels on the marble floor. Then, the shattered glass. Clara didn't make a scene. She simply collapsed near the altar, a small silver vial rolling from her limp fingers. "Raymond," she gasped, her voice a fragile reed. "I couldn't watch you marry her. I'm sorry." Raymond didn't hesitate. He dropped my hands. The warmth left my fingers so fast it felt like a physical burn. He scrambled toward her, his custom Tom Ford tuxedo trousers scraping against the stone. "Clara, look at me, breathe!" he screamed. His voice filled with a raw, agonizing panic he had never once shown for me. "Raymond, the vows," I whispered, my voice trembling as I took a step forward. "The priest is waiting. The ambulance is already on its way. Just let the medics—" "Shut up, Beatrice," he snapped, glaring up at me with a feral, hateful intensity. "Can't you see she's dying? Your damn wedding doesn't matter right now." He scooped her into his arms, crushing her against his chest. As he turned to run toward the exit, his sharp elbow caught my shoulder, sending me stumbling backward. I tripped on the heavy tulle of my petticoat. The fall was catastrophic. The edge of the solid marble altar met the base of my skull with a sickening, wet thud. The pain was immediate, and blinding white flash that instantly paralyzed my limbs. I lay there on the cold stone, staring at the painted angels on the ceiling. I could feel the blood pool rapidly beneath my head, soaking into the pristine white lace of my gown, turning it a heavy, dark crimson. "Raymond," I tried to call out, but it came out as a choked, bubbly gasp. Through the stinging blur of my failing vision, I watched his back. He didn't even turn around. He didn't hear the gasps of the crowd or the screams of my mother. He only cared about the girl in his arms. "I'm sorry, Beatrice," he muttered over his shoulder, his voice tight with an urgency that wasn't for me. "She needs me more." The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me entirely was Clara's face over Raymond's shoulder. Her eyes weren't closed. She was looking straight at me, her pale lips curled into a tiny, triumphant smile. She wasn't poisoned. It was all a show, and I was dying for it. Then the cold took me. A sharp, violent gasp tore from my throat. My eyes flew open. I wasn't staring at painted angels. I was staring at a sleek, matte black ceiling. The air didn't smell like lilies and copper. It smelled of expensive leather, Cuban tobacco, and a faint, distinct hint of Creed Aventus cologne. I bolted upright, my breath rattling in my chest. My hands flew to the back of my head. No blood, no wound. Just my thick, dark hair, perfectly styled. "Rough dream," a deep, resonant voice asked from across the room. I froze. Slowly, my eyes tracked toward the heavy mahogany desk. Sitting behind it was a man with silver-streaked hair, sharp, slate-grey eyes, and a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than a mid-sized sedan. Arthur Montgomery, Raymond's father, the undisputed patriarch of the Montgomery Group, a man feared on Wall Street and respected globally. "Arthur," my voice croaked. It sounded raspy, but alive. Incredibly alive. He looked up from his iPad, a slight, intrigued frown creasing his brow. "You usually call me Mr. Montgomery, Beatrice. Are you all right? You've been staring at that catering contract for 20 minutes, and then you just drifted off." My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I grabbed the sleek iPhone 15 Pro, sitting on the glass desk in front of me. The digital clock read August 14th, 2024, 2:15 p.m., 2 months before the wedding. 2 months before my death, I had been sent back. The universe, in its twisted, magnificent mercy, had given me a second chance. The agonizing ache of the back of my head was gone, replaced by a cold, glittering rage that settled deep into my bones. My hands ceased their trembling. My jaw clenched so tightly my molars ached. "I'm fine," I said, my voice leveling out, becoming smooth and hard as flint. "Just a temporary lapse in focus. It won't happen again." Arthur studied me for a long beat. He was a brilliant predator. He could smell a shift in the wind from a mile away. "Good. Because if my son is going to marry into the Vance Group's logistics empire, I need to know his bride has her head screwed on straight. Raymond is a capable boy, but he lacks killer instinct. A capable boy." I almost laughed out loud. Raymond was a thief who used my family's connections to secure his position as CEO, all while planning to discard me the moment he felt secure. "He does," I agreed softly, looking Arthur dead in the eye. "Which is why I think we need to restructure the prenuptial agreement, Arthur. In fact, I think we need to restructure a great many things." Arthur's eyebrows shot up. For the first time since I had known him, he looked genuinely amused. "Go on. The execution of a perfect revenge requires absolute stillness. You cannot let them see the blade until it is already between their ribs." When Raymond called me later that evening, his voice was smooth, dripping with the casual arrogance of a man who believed he had already won. "Hey, babe. Sorry I missed dinner. Work at the Hudson Yards project ran late. You know how it is. In my past life, I would have cooed, told him to rest, and offered to send a car to pick up his favorite sushi from Masa. Tonight, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Tribeca penthouse, watching the rain streak the glass like tears. "I understand completely, Raymond," I said, my voice a perfect imitation of a doting fiancé. "Don't overwork yourself. The Hudson Yards deal is crucial for your legacy." What I didn't tell him was that I had spent the last 3 hours reviewing the Hudson Yards digital ledger. Raymond thought he was a genius, but he was sloppy. To impress his father, he had secretly shifted $30 million of unallocated corporate funds into a shell company registered in Delaware, all to cover a massive zoning deficit he had failed to anticipate. He was planning to balance the books using my family's dowry immediately after the wedding. "You're the best, Beatrice," he murmured, his tone distracted. In the background, I heard the faint, distinct chime of a luxury hotel elevator, the specific three-tone ring of the Carlyle. And then, a woman's soft, breathless giggle. My hand gripped the phone until my knuckles turned stark white, but my voice remained a gentle caress. "Get some sleep, darling." The next morning, my legal team arrived at the Montgomery Group headquarters. I didn't bring my family's standard corporate attorneys. I hired Harrison and Croft, a firm known exclusively for corporate liquidations and high-conflict divorces. Raymond met me in the executive conference room, looking slightly disheveled in a fresh white shirt, but wearing the same smirk. "Beatrice, what's all this? I thought we already signed the standard prenup last month." "We did," I said, sliding a sleek, black Mont Blanc pen across the glass table. The heavy gold nib clicked sharply against the surface. "But after speaking with your father yesterday, I realized our family's assets are too intertwined. This is an addendum, a safety net for the Montgomery Group, really." He laughed, a short, patronizing sound. "Babe, I don't have time to read 50 pages of legalese right now. I have a board meeting in 10 minutes. "Then don't read it," I whispered, leaning forward, channeling every ounce of warmth I could muster into my smile. "Just trust me. It states that if either party is found to be engaged in financial infidelity or acts that cause severe reputational damage to the partner's family enterprise prior to the ceremony, all joint venture rights, including the Hudson Yards equity, default entirely to the injured party's family. It's standard corporate governance, Raymond. Your father already signed his approval as chairman." Raymond's eyes flicked to the last page. Sure enough, Arthur's bold, sweeping signature in blue ink was already there. Arthur loved risk management. Presented correctly, this looked like a shield for his company against my family. Raymond, terrified of looking weak or incompetent in front of his father, grabbed the pen. "Fine," he muttered, scribbling his name with a careless flourish. "Are we done? I have a real job to run." "We're completely done, Raymond," I said, watching the ink dry on the paper. The trap snapped shut with a silent, satisfying click. Phase 2 required addressing the parasite. 2 weeks later, I arranged a private meeting at an upscale tea house in the Upper East Side. Clara Hensley was already sitting there when I arrived, sipping an artisanal Earl Grey. She wore an oversized faded cashmere sweater that screamed bohemian poverty, a stark contrast to my tailored Chanel tweed suit. "Beatrice," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness as she reached for my hand. I subtly moved to adjust my Hermès Kelly bag, leaving her fingers hanging in the air. "Thank you for meeting me. I know it's awkward, given my history with Raymond. I just want you to know, I'm so happy for him. He deserves stability." "Stability," I repeated, tasting the word like sour milk. "How kind of you, Clara, especially considering your medical situation." Clara froze, her teacup hovering an inch above its saucer. A subtle tremor shook her hand, causing a single drop of dark tea to spill onto the pristine white tablecloth. "My medical situation?" "Oh, don't play modest," I said, leaning in, my voice dropping to a confidential whisper. I pulled a glossy manila folder from my bag and laid it flat between us. "Raymond told me everything about your chronic heart condition, the fainting spells, the specialist in London who told you that stress could be fatal." Clara's pale face drained of what little color it had. Her breathing hitched. He told you that?" He hadn't, of course. In my past life, Raymond had kept her illness a fiercely guarded secret, using it to justify his late-night disappearances. I had discovered the truth only after my death, through the court documents of their eventual inheritance battle with Arthur. Clara wasn't sick. She had paid a corrupt clinic in Soho $20,000 to forge her medical history to keep Raymond on a leash. Of course he did, I lied effortlessly, watching the cold sweat break out along her hairline. We don't keep secrets, Clara. In fact, I was so moved by your plight that I used my family's foundation to pull some strings. I've secured you a permanent spot at the Mayo Clinic's experimental cardiovascular wing in Minnesota. They expect you by the end of the week, all expenses paid. Clara swallowed hard, her throat bobbing convulsively. Minnesota? Beatrice, I can't leave New York. My support system is here. But your health is failing, I said, my voice hardening, the velvet glove slipping just enough to show the steel beneath. Surely you wouldn't reject a life-saving opportunity just to stay near another woman's fiancé. What would people say if they found out you refused medical treatment just to hang around Raymond? They might think you were faking it. The word hung in the air like a heavy mist. Clara's gaze dropped to the folder. Her fingers twitched against her napkin, wrinkling the linen. She knew I had her trapped. If she refused, I would dig deeper. If she accepted, she was exiled. I'll have to think about it, she stammered, her voice losing its airy, ethereal quality, replaced by a raw, jagged panic. Don't think too long, I said, standing up and smoothly buttoning my jacket. The flight is booked for Friday. Raymond already knows. He agreed it was for the best. He didn't know yet, but by the time he found out, the narrative would already be set in stone. I left her sitting there, staring at the tea stain spreading across the white cloth, looking exactly like the bleeding mess she had made of me in another life. The beautiful thing about a house of cards is that you don't need a sledgehammer to bring it down. You just need to blow gently on the right corner. By late September, Raymond was unraveling. The Friday deadline for Clara's departure had passed, and she hadn't gone to Minnesota. Instead, terrified of losing her grip on him, she had panicked and staging a minor collapse at her apartment, forcing Raymond to skip a massive, multi-billion-dollar investor gala for the Hudson Yards project. Arthur had been forced to take the stage alone to cover his son's absence. I sat in the front row, watching Arthur's face harden into a mask of pure, glacial fury as the press whispered about his unreliable heir. The next morning, I initiated the next phase. I leaked the audit. It wasn't a public leak. Not yet. I sent the complete digital ledger of Raymond's illegal $30 million shell company transfer directly to Arthur's personal, encrypted email address. I sent it from an untraceable Proton mail account with a simple subject line: "Look closely at the Hudson Yards zoning deficit." 2 hours later, my phone rang. It was Arthur. "Beatrice, come to my office. Now." When I walked into the Montgomery Group boardroom, the atmosphere was suffocating. The heavy motorized blinds were drawn, plunging the room into a dim, amber twilight. Raymond was standing in front of his father's desk, his face flushed, sweat visibly glistening on his forehead despite the blast of the air conditioner. Arthur sat perfectly still, his hands folded over a thick stack of printed financial statements. "Explain this, Raymond," Arthur said, his voice dangerously low, a soft growl that preceded a fatal strike. "Father, it's a temporary reallocation," Raymond stammered, his fingers twitching wildly against the seams of his trousers. "The zoning permits were delayed, and the fines would have stalled construction. I was going to replace the funds the second the Vance Group dowry cleared after the wedding. Beatrice knows about it. She's fine with it." Arthur slowly turned his slate-grey eyes toward me. "Is this true, Beatrice? Did you authorize the use of your family's capital to cover my son's gross incompetence?" I stepped into the room, the sharp click of my Christian Louboutin heels echoing off the wood paneling like a metronome counting down their final seconds. I let my face fall into an expression of profound, devastating shock. My hands flew to my mouth, my shoulders trembling slightly. "Raymond, how could you say that?" I whispered, my voice cracking with a perfectly orchestrated vulnerability. "I knew nothing about this. Are you saying you only married me to use my family as a financial shield for your fraud?" Raymond's jaw dropped. He staggered backward a step, staring at me as if he were seeing a ghost. "Beatrice, what the hell are you talking about? You told me to trust you. You signed the addendum." "I signed an addendum to protect our families from reputational damage, Raymond, because I loved you," I said, letting a cold, hard edge cut through my tears as I looked directly at Arthur. "But this is criminal. He has misappropriated $30 million of Montgomery Group funds. If the SEC catches wind of this before the wedding, the Vance Group's logistics stock will plummet by association. My father will ruin you." Arthur stood up. He didn't yell. He didn't smash anything. The absolute silence of his rage was terrifying. He walked around the desk, ignoring Raymond entirely, and stopped directly in front of me. "The addendum you had him sign," Arthur murmured, his eyes locking onto mine with a terrifyingly brilliant comprehension. "The default clause, if either party causes severe reputational or financial damage prior to the ceremony, all of Raymond's personal equity in the Hudson Yards project defaults entirely to me." I finished smoothly, my tears vanishing instantly, replaced by a calm, level gaze. "Which means, Arthur, that your son no longer owns a single square inch of the Montgomery Group's crown jewel. I do." Raymond let out a strangled, choked sound. "Father, she set me up. She's lying." "Shut up!" Arthur roared, the sound vibrating the glass walls of the boardroom. He turned on Raymond like a silverback protector defending his territory. "You stupid, arrogant little boy. You bypassed the board, you embezzled funds, and you handed your entire legacy to your fiancée on a silver platter because you were too lazy to read a contract." "Father, please. You are stripped of your title as CEO, effective immediately," Arthur barked, his voice cutting through Raymond's desperate pleas like a blade through silk. "You will not step foot in this building again until I decide what to do with you. And if a single word of this leaks to the press, I will personally hand you to the federal prosecutors." Raymond looked down at his own hands, which were shaking so violently he had to tuck them into his pockets. The supreme confidence that had defined him his entire life had vanished, leaving behind a terrified, sweating boy who realized his kingdom had vanished before he even wore the crown. But I wasn't done with him yet. The mirror had to reflect the crime perfectly. That evening, I arranged for a courier to deliver a package to Clara's apartment. Inside was a copy of Raymond's termination letter, along with a frozen bank account notice. I knew exactly what she would do. A parasite doesn't stay attached to a dying host. An hour later, I tracked Raymond's phone location to a dingy, low-tier bar in Hell's Kitchen, the only place he could go where the bartenders wouldn't recognize the disgraced Prince of Manhattan. I dialed his number. He answered on the first ring, his voice slurred, thick with scotch and desperation. "Beatrice, please, you have to fix this. Talk to my father. I love you, I swear I do. It was all for us." "Meet me at the St. Regis, Raymond," I interrupted, my voice flat, devoid of any warmth. "The Grand Ballroom. October 14th is coming up, and we need to discuss the final arrangements." The wedding is still on," he gasped, a pathetic, desperate hope flaring up in his voice. "Just meet me there," I said, and hung up. When I arrived at the St. Regis, the ballroom was dark, empty, and silent. The heavy white lilies for the upcoming weekend gala had already been delivered, filling the vast space with that thick, suffocating scent that had once been the last thing I smelled. I stood exactly where the altar would be, waiting. The heavy double doors creaked open. Raymond stumbled in, his clothes rumpled, his tie loosened. But he wasn't alone. Clara was with him, clutching his arm, her eyes darting around the shadows. She had realized Raymond was ruined, but she was trying one last, desperate play to secure a payout from me to stay away. "Beatrice," Raymond breathed, stepping toward the light. "Thank God." Before he could reach me, the side doors of the ballroom clicked open. The sharp, heavy footsteps of a man echoed through the space. Arthur Montgomery walked out of the shadows, accompanied by two men in dark suits carrying heavy leather briefcases. Raymond froze, his face draining of color as he looked between his father and me. "What is this?" Raymond whispered, his voice trembling. "This is the end of your tenure, Raymond," I said, my voice echoing off the high, painted ceilings. I reached into my bag and pulled out a document, sliding it across the heavy mahogany table that had been set up near the altar. "These are the final dissolution papers for our engagement, along with a full corporate release of your remaining shares." "No," Raymond stammered, shaking his head wildly, a cold sweat breaking out on his neck. "No, Beatrice, you can't do this to me. Clara, tell her. Tell her we're nothing." Clara, seeing the writing on the wall and the sheer power radiating from Arthur, instantly took a step away from Raymond. "Raymond, stop it," she said, her voice dropping its fragile, sweet act entirely, becoming sharp and venal. "It's over. You ruined yourself. I told you not to touch those funds." Raymond stared at her, his eyes wide with a horrific, gut-punch realization. "Clara, you told me to do it. You said we needed the money to get away from my father." "I never said that," she lied coldly, smoothing down her skirt. "You're unstable, Raymond." The betrayal was beautiful to watch. Layer by layer, his world was collapsing, stripped away by the very person he had destroyed me for. He reached out to grab her arm, his fingers clawing desperately at her sleeve. "Get your hands off her!" Arthur's voice boomed through the ballroom. Raymond spun around, his knees literally buckling as he sank to the floor, his hands scraping against the cold marble right where I had bled to death in another lifetime. "Father, please, don't do this to me. Don't leave me with nothing." "You did this to yourself," Arthur said, not even looking down at his son. He turned to me, his expression shifting into something resembling profound respect. "The board has voted, Beatrice. In light of the Vance Group's continued partnership and your unparalleled handling of the Hudson Yards restructuring, we are offering you the vacant seat as managing director of the Montgomery Group." I looked down at Raymond, who was weeping silently on the floor, his face pressed against the stone. He looked so small, so pathetic. "I accept, Arthur," I said, my voice steady, my jaw set. "But we have one more contract to sign first. Now write Part 4, and..." Arthur reached into the breast pocket of his bespoke charcoal suit, unscrewing the cap of his silver Mont Blanc pen with a deliberate, agonizing slowness. He didn't hesitate. He didn't read the fine print. He had already seen it. He pressed the heavy gold nib to the paper and signed his name in sweeping, brutal strokes. Raymond's eyes bulged. He scrambled forward, his palms slapping against the polished mahogany table. What did you just sign?" he whispered, his voice cracking, high and thin, like a frightened child's. I pulled the document back, slipping it into my leather portfolio. "A marriage license, Raymond. Dated for our original wedding day, October 14th, 2024. Raymond blinked, his brain refusing to process the words. "But I didn't sign it," No, Arthur said, his voice a low, resonant rumble that shook the quiet of the ballroom. You didn't. The bride's family requires a blood tie to the Montgomery Group to maintain their logistics partnership. You have proven yourself entirely unfit to provide it. Therefore, I will. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a physical weight, pressing down on the room, suffocating the air out of Raymond's lungs. Then the realization hit him, his face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. You're marrying my father, he shrieked, the sound tearing from his throat in a ragged, pathetic wail. He staggered backward, his hands pulling at his own hair. Beatrice, you can't. This is insane. He's 30 years older than you. Insane is stealing $30 million to fund the lifestyle of a woman who bought forged medical records in a Soho back alley, I replied, my voice as calm and flat as a frozen lake. Clara flinched, as if I had backhanded her across the jaw. She spun toward the heavy oak double doors, her cheap heels clicking frantically against the marble, desperate to escape the blast radius of Raymond's destruction. Lock them, I commanded, without raising my voice. Arthur's 2 security men stepped backward. The heavy brass deadbolts slid into place with a resounding, hollow clack. The sound echoed through the cavernous ballroom like a judge's gavel. Clara froze, her hands pressed flat against the carved wood, her shoulders trembling violently. Did you really think I didn't know? Arthur asked, stepping around the table, his slate-grey eyes fixed on his weeping son. Here was the twist Raymond never saw coming, the true depth of his father's cruelty. Did you honestly believe, Arthur continued, his tone dripping with acidic contempt, that you could siphon $30 million out of my corporate ledger and I wouldn't notice? Raymond stopped pulling his hair, his mouth hanging open. You knew. I knew the very afternoon you initiated the transfer 3 months ago, Arthur sneered, towering over him. I allowed it to proceed. I wanted to see if your fiancée possessed the intellect and the ruthlessness to catch you before the auditors did. If she was as useless and blind as you, I would have let you both burn. But Beatrice caught you. She trapped you. She stripped you of your assets and delivered your head to me on a spike. I needed a partner with fangs, Raymond. You were merely the bait I used to test her. Raymond's knees gave out. He collapsed onto the cold marble floor, his mind shattering completely. The father he had spent his entire life trying to impress had used his treason as a corporate aptitude test for his fiancée. He wasn't just defeated, he was meaningless. A pawn sacrificed on the first move. Clara, realizing that Raymond was permanently, irreparably stripped of every cent he would ever own, made her final, fatal miscalculation. Raymond, please! She cried out, her voice pitching into a hysterical theatrical whine. She rushed away from the locked doors and threw herself toward him, her hands outstretched. Your father is stealing your fiancée! Do something! Fight back! Raymond looked up at her. He saw the washed-out lavender dress, the wide, panicked eyes, the woman for whom he had thrown away a billion-dollar empire. He realized with a sickening clarity that she was the anchor dragging him into the abyss. Raymond, Clara pleaded, grabbing his forearm. My heart. I can't breathe. The stress, please. I need you. She clutched her chest, her knees buckling slightly. This time, the panic attacking her nervous system was entirely genuine. Her face was chalk white, a cold sweat beading along her hairline as she hyperventilated. Raymond's eyes darkened with a feral, terrified revulsion. As Clara leaned her weight against him, gasping for air, he violently shoved her backward. Get away from me! He screamed, his voice raw with hatred. Clara's cheap heels slipped wildly on the polished marble. She flailed, her arms pinwheeling in the air, and fell hard. The base of her skull clipped the sharp edge of the marble altar step with a sickening, wet crack. It wasn't enough to kill her, but it was enough to paralyze her with agonizing, blinding pain. She sprawled across the floor, landing in the exact geometric center of the altar, the precise spot where my blood had pooled in another lifetime. Clara gasped, a choked, bubbly sound tearing from her throat. "Raymond," she wheezed, her fingers curling helplessly against the cold stone, her vision swimming. Raymond didn't even look at her. He ignored her completely. He dropped to his hands and knees and crawled rapidly toward me, his custom trousers scraping harshly against the stone. He stopped at my feet, his hands trembling as he grabbed the hem of my tailored tweed skirt. "Beatrice, please," he begged, tears of pure, pathetic terror spilling down his cheeks, leaving wet streaks on his collar. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll do anything. I'll sign whatever you want. Don't marry him. Just give me another chance. I don't care about her. She means nothing to me. I need you more. She means nothing to me. I need you more." The exact, perfect inverse of the words that had ushered me into the dark. I stood perfectly still, feeling the cool silk lining of my jacket against my skin. I didn't pull away. I simply looked over Raymond's quivering shoulder. Clara was lying on the cold marble, clutching the back of her bleeding head, watching us. Her eyes were wide with shock, profound betrayal, and a desperate, agonizing helplessness. She couldn't move. She could only watch the man she had schemed to steal abandon her on the floor to grovel at my feet. I held her gaze for a long, agonizing moment, and then slowly, deliberately, I let my lips curl into a tiny, triumphant smile. Clara let out a muffled, broken sob, the realization crushing the last of her spirit. The mirror was complete. The justice was poetic, symmetrical, and absolutely devastating. On October 14th, 2024, the scent of white orchids filled the grand ballroom at the St. Regis, New York. I had strictly banned lilies. I wore a custom Vera Wang gown, free of the heavy, dragging tulle that had once tripped me. It was tailored sharp and sleek, hugging my silhouette like a suit of armor. I was 26, wide awake, and utterly terrifying. Arthur stood at the altar, waiting for me. He looked distinguished, powerful, and entirely in control, a predator acknowledging his equal. Raymond was there too, not at the altar. He stood in the back corner, near the service exit, wearing a cheap, off-the-rack suit. Arthur had forced him to work the door as an usher to maintain his newly established trust fund, a meager $5,000 a month, just enough to keep him chained to his humiliation, entirely dependent on my signature. He handed out gold-embossed programs to the 300 guests, his eyes hollow, his face pale and drawn, forced to watch me walk down the aisle toward his father. As I approached the altar, my Christian Louboutin heels clicked sharply against the marble. I paused for a fraction of a second, looking down. The stone was pristine, white, perfect. There was no blood. There was no ghost of Clara Hensley, who had been permanently committed to a state-mandated psychiatric facility in North Dakota, after her forged medical records caught the attention of federal insurance fraud investigators. I stepped over the spot where I had died, took Arthur's hand, and claimed my empire. I walked out of the St. Regis not as a discarded fiancée, but as the undisputed queen of the Montgomery Empire. Some call my actions ruthless. I simply call them balancing the ultimate scales. If you felt the sweet justice in this dark revenge, please hit that like button. Share this story with someone who deserves a second chance at life. And always remember to subscribe to follow my next incredible rebirth story right now.